Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 42, Machine Learning. In times of AI, artificial intelligence and so on, it's more and more important to understand how machines really work, how machines do really learn, what is meant by artificial intelligence, what is meant by machine learning, how does it work, and so on. And artificial intelligence, there is no clear definition of it. There are different definitions of it. One problem of it is also that the intelligence itself is not clearly defined what it really is. However, machine learning can be defined in a much more clear way or understood in a much more clear way because you can really understand the process of what is done there, what happens there, and mostly it's about really how can machines basically learn to solve certain problem or to do a certain task in a way which is not just a simple algorithm, but in a way which is interpreting data basically. So to understand this, I think have to think back to school. I'm not sure if you did this in school, but in school we had this part where we had several points, for example, drawn in a coordinate system, and we needed to find a curve which would fit the data to this curve. So, for example, you would have wanted to draw a straight line between 2 points. This you could easily do. There's no deviation between it because 2 points you can always connect with a straight line. However, let's say you don't have 2 points, but you have 4 points, and they are not exactly on a straight line, but they are kind of on a straight line. So you assume that this behavior is following a straight line, and the deviations are just some measurement errors or something like this. And doing this to get the line which perfectly describes these data points is more difficult. But how do you do it? So the most reasonable approach is basically to try different straight lines. So as you know, the function for a straight line is basically m times x plus b. So where m and b are parameters, so m is the slope and b is the offset, and x is of course the variable. And if you can then now you can vary these parameters m and b, so the slope and the offset, to find the different kind of straight lines. And if you do this, you can always say, okay, from the data points that I have, I measure just the distance to the value of x at this straight line, and then I reduce this value to be as small as possible so that the distances from each measurement point are as close, as small as possible. This is basically your goal. And this you can do by some algorithms, or you can do it in your head by trying, which might be a bit tedious at some time, but by now there are many tools that can do this. For example, our calculator even could do such things, and then you can basically see how good your fit is and have the straight line which best describes your data. You can also do this for, of course, other functions, for parabolas of different Mach order, and therefore there you can see also how you can fit these points in there. And this is also, if you begin to study physics, especially on the experimental side, this will be kind of your daily bread, trying to fit data points to some function, some curve or something. And there are many ways to do this. There are many techniques about to do this, and also to interpret the data, to know how good is your fit, to have statistical values that describe the goodness of your fit. And what's important to know, I mentioned already, you can say, okay, if there are deviations between these points, you can call those errors or measurement errors. And what you do in physics is then, of course, you try them as bars. So you say, okay, it's not this one point, my measurement value, because I account for the fact that I have not measured this data perfectly, but there are some errors on this. And then I can, even if I try to draw those bars, then I can also check how accurate my curve is, not only by whether it passes exactly through the point, which would basically be nonsense, but whether it is in the area of these error bars. And these are techniques to check how good your fit is and so on. So this is really relevant in science, but it's also relevant in everyday problems, and also more importantly in problems that this machine learning tries to solve. Because this, what I described before, if you do this with a with some calculator, with some device, with some computer, you will basically be doing a kind of machine learning already. So it's a pretty primitive kind, but it's already a computer who is learning how to fit the data, basically. And machine learning is actually not much more complicated than that from its basic principle. It is more complicated in the methods it uses and in the kind of data it tries to fit, because machine learning usually does not have just one variable, x in the case of these functions, that it tries to where it tries to get a fit for, but several variables, because of that it's also often called multivariate analysis. This is also often meant, or if people talk about multivariate analysis, the kind of analysis they do are most connected to some machine learning algorithms. So you, in this case, you not only have x, but you have several variables, y, z, and so on. And this these are just cases where several variables need to be accounted for. So let's just take an example. Let's think, for example, about housing costs. So let's say you have a house and you want to just know for how much can I sell this house that I have. And there are many things that are relevant for it. First, you might think, okay, my house has this size, another house is of the same size, so the price should be equal, right? But it could be, for example, that your house is much more modern than this other house, and therefore you could say, I can really my house has more value, or is more valuable than this one, because it's more modern. Another thing could be that the house of the other person maybe is directly in the city, while yours is more remotely. This could mean then that the other house is more value because of its location. Its location is more to the center or more urban and so on, and therefore the price increases. So you see here, for the costs of a house, there are many variables that are relevant to know what the price of the house is. And more than that, it's not just the variables that are relevant, it's that they are weighted differently. I mean, you can think that maybe the location is more important than for the house price is maybe more important than how modern the house is, or it's the other way around, whatever. So there's also this weight that you need to apply, and therefore to find the right price for your house might be really difficult. And here machine learning methods are about to help, but because these are doing these multivariate analyses. And what is done there is most oftentimes one method that is used there, which is often talked about, are these so-called neural networks. So they are trying to mimic the neurons in our brain, and they do this by having different layers. And they have an input layer where the data with this many variables that it can have is put in. So these are fixed data values. So you can imagine for our house pricing example, those are really houses where the price is known. and the price is known, and also it is known how modern is the house, where is it located, and so on. All these different variables and its all these and its price is known, and then they are put in there, and there are different layers, and then there can be different layers, and in the end there's an output layer which basically gives you the model of how you can, for some a certain house, how you can compute the price for which you could sell it. If there is more than one layer in the intermediate area between the input and the output layer, then you would call this deep learning. This is what's meant if one is talking about deep learning. And what you see now is that there needs to be a model. So you have some model, for example, you have all these variables and you have this weight. This is basically the model that you put in. And then you say, give these data points with all these different variables and the result of it, the price in the end. And then this neural network basically uses the data and uses the data with all these variables and tries to put the weights, which would be the parameters, that it tries to put the weights such that the price of the house can be predicted by this function, by this model. And this it tries for all the data point, and it fixes the parameters again and again such that the differences from it, the error which it then has, where it cannot be completely describe the data, are minimal. That it has the perfect parameters which can describe all the data. And to see how this is connected to the neural net or work, or how this can be understood, these different layers of the network, is let's think about image recognition. So this is one issue that is used or for which machine learning algorithms are used. And let's, for example, say we want to have an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm, which can tell us whether something on a photo, so I give them some photo and I want this algorithm to tell me if it is a car or if it is something else. And the way I do this is I basically, or what an algorithm, for example, it then does is just illustrated in reality. It would work a bit different, but for example, it would look, okay, are there wheels on it? Are there any wheels? Are there 4 wheels? Are there 2 wheels? How many wheels are there? Are there wheels at all? And then it would say, okay, if there are wheels, this might be a car. If there are 4 wheels, it is pretty certain that it is a car. But now you know, okay, if I go basically if I see an old car which is completely destroyed and there are no wheels anymore on it, I might still call it a car. I might not call it a functioning car, but I might say, yeah, that it's a car because it was built as a car and therefore it kind of is still a car. And therefore, it might not be weighted as highly as if something else, for example. Or you might say, okay, does it have some doors, for example? Yeah, you can say, okay, many cars or most cars do have doors, but there are also cars like you see on a safari, or these kind of cars which you use more for off-road purposes. Some of those do not really have doors or have different kind of doors, and so you see there are many differences. So if the algorithm sees that something is there, this not already means that this is definitely a car, but it might mean that this is a car, so it has to put a weight on it, and this weight is what it basically varies. It says, how certain can I be that if I see a picture with four wheels that it is a car? So it puts a weight on that. And then it says, okay, how certain can I be if it has, for example, a steering wheel, that it is a car? Then it puts a weight on that. How certain is it that if I see a door that it is a car? And then it puts a weight on that, and so on. And in the end, it gets fed all this data and tries to put these parameters perfectly to predict if some image that I feed into it is a car or not. And I was now already mentioning how this works, that we feed the data into it. So basically, it learns from this data. So we put data into it, data where I say, okay, this is a car, this is not a car, this is a car, this is not a car, and so on. And because the algorithm knows what is what, it can basically tune itself to that and can say, okay, this is a car, and try to put the weights in the right order, and tune its model to the data, and then get perfect this model to it. Okay, time for a short break. And as usual in these breaks, I like to read a short excerpt of my new book or my new novel, Alien Thoughts. Patricia entered her office and sat down at her desk. Exhausted, she closed her eyes and collected herself. When she opened her eyes again, her eyes fell on a photo on her desk. It showed Tom and her just before they had broken up. She wondered why it was still there. Maybe it was because she hardly ever came into this office anymore. She spent most of her time in her office at the headquarters. When she looked closer, she realized how long it had been since she had seen Tom. His face was almost foreign to her. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. She had to think of the moment when they had met for the first time. It had been in this building, one floor below, in the lecture hall where she was giving her lecture this morning. She had been in the audience then. At first she had not liked Tom. He was cheeky and asked questions in every lecture, whether he was called or not. He was not afraid to use a cheeky tone, even in front of lecturers like Boris. She believed that was why Boris had been so disapproving of her relationship with Tom. While she was calmly processing the information and asking the lecturer questions in private after the lecture, Tom was behaving the opposite way. She thought it was rude and did not have a good opinion of Tom. He, on the other hand, was very interested in her. Something about her seemed to fascinate him, although she revealed little of herself in her shy manner. Her opinion of him changed abruptly when she realized that Tom and she were very much alike, even if it didn't look that way from the outside. He was just as enthusiastic about the accomplishment of the new government and believed in their justness as she did. His cheeky manner was just another expression of the same hunger for a just world that she also felt. Over time, they got to know each other better. Tom had had experiences similar to hers. The more they realized how similar they were, the more their affection for each other grew. Their initial dislike quickly turned into a deep love. Their similar past and shared ideals connected them. An almost inseparable relationship developed. But eventually it too came to an end, Patricia realized bitterly. So this was a short excerpt in which I tell about this relationship between Patricia and Tom, so the background of it, and Tom will occur later in the novel. So if you want to find more about how this works out, what's happening between them, then I encourage you to buy the book, to read it, so you can get it on Amazon. And if you liked it, then I really encourage you to write a review. This just helps other readers to get to know the book and to know if this book is something for them too. But what I need to consider there, of course, is when I have done this, and then in the end I have my perfect function which can predict if it's a car or not. If I only have done it this way, this can be pretty critical or pretty bad, because what can happen there is that it is an effect we call overtraining. So it can be that the data is that my algorithm has fitted the function or the prediction function so closely to the data that it does that if I put a new image of a different car or slightly different car into it, that it does not recognize it as a car because it's too closely fitted to this data. If you think back about fitting functions, which we talked about in the beginning, then you can see this also there. So for example, I said we had these 4 data points which are pretty close on a straight line, but I could not connect them perfectly on the straight line. I needed to make a trade-off to put a straight line such that there are some points that I did not catch but are pretty close to it. I could have also said, let's just take a parabola of 4th order, and then I can fit it such that every point is that I get every point of it. But if it is now something where I have these 4 data points and there are different data points in the set which I have not measured, then if it's if it's kind of a straight line, I have to assume that all the other points would also lie on the straight line. And therefore my parabola of 4th order is perfectly describing these 4 data points, but it would be really bad at describing the other points that I have not measured. And this shows also that how some models, some explanation of something can be completely wrong if there's not enough data, or if it's just trained to that data to only fit this and not the stuff that I have not measured yet. And this is the same in machine learning algorithms, where when I do this overtraining, then they are too closely fitted to the data that I feed it into it. And if I then do what I actually wanted to achieve by it, to give it new data and have it predict the outcome of this data correctly, then it will not work because it's too closely fitted to the data or too closely trained to the data that I have given it. And therefore what one does is one separates the data that one has into training data and test data. So usually this is 80-20 or 70-30, but you can take an arbitrary ratio. And the training data is doing what we with the training data, you do what we described before. You just put it in and let the machine learning algorithm basically perfect its model for predicting that what a car is and so on. And what you then do is you put the test data, you put it in as real data. So you don't say this is a car, this is not a car, and so on. You do not tell the algorithm. You let it run on it and predict whether the algorithm thinks if it is a car or if it is not a car. And if you then, and from this you can then check how good the algorithm really is, how good your model really is, because if the algorithms says these are all no cars, but there were cars among them, then you know, okay, something went wrong there was some overtraining, and I need to account for that. I need to fix my model, my algorithm, and so on, to account for this fact and to make it less overtraining, and to allow for some room in there that it can really make predictions. So this is basically how machine learning works. This is, of course, just the basics. There is a lot more that goes into it, a lot more that I don't know much about. But this is the basic idea of it, and it's a part of AI, and it's therefore I think it's also a major part of AI, because many algorithms that you connect to AI these days use it. For example, as we had it, image recognition, speech recognition. This is all some machine learning algorithm that is behind that. And as you can see from this, is also it is really fitting the data to or really fitting it to the data that you put in, and it is really believing you that the data that you give it, where you say this is a car, this is not a car, that this is true. So it's really dependent on that. And I think if you think about just the recent things about ChatGPT and these large language models, where it turned out that depending on the questions you ask them, they tend to be lying and to lying really, really hard and really, really audacious, you can understand why that is, because the data that they find mostly in the internet, they are usually really certain that this data is the truth, that this really is true, and therefore they are really trusting on this, and therefore they tend to find stuff in the internet which is not true, which they believe to be true, and therefore in a really certain way say this is how it is, or state the facts as they are. And from there you can see that that there is a real problem with this, where this is not really. So you should not really put too much trust in these AI models. And from this, I think you can also see what is still lacking, or what is lacking with these AIs. And this is the kind of what humans are basically used to do, to question these results. To if you have a fit, if you have something and some result that you question, can this really be? Can this work out? Could this be the case? This is not really implemented there, and I think it is also not really possible to implement this all the way along. You can implement it in some way. You can, like we saw with training data and test data, you can get some feel of how accurate it is by the algorithm itself, that it finds it out himself how accurately he himself is. But this is just just a little bit more closer to that. You cannot, I do not believe that you can get a machine that is really questioning itself like a human would do, because there's just more going into it. I think this is more than just computer algorithms, or more than just processes that are running. I think there's also a spiritual component. There's this part of consciousness that is not to be described scientifically, that comes into play there. And I think therefore this cannot, I do not believe that it will be possible to and someday put this into a machine and it will work out perfectly, which shows why I believe also there will always, even though machines will be able to outperform us in speed and in process speed and so on, and in what they can compute, where they already outperform us. They can in nanoseconds, they can compute things that we cannot solve in 100 years maybe, but in other ways we are outperforming them in a sense of questioning things, don't taking things as complete truth and so on. So being doubtful and so on, I think or skeptical, and I think in this way we outperform the machines, and I think this will not change, because this, I think, is connected to our consciousness, to the fact that we are conscious beings and self-reflective beings, and I think this you cannot really put into a machine. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the blog. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast, and then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that, and now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.